The death has taken place this week of Ray Davey, who established the Corrymeela community in 1965, which was itself an indication of a new kind of something happening. The Second Vatican Council had just finished, which opened up the possibility of new relationships between the major denominations. You've got Ian Paisley agitating as if none of this had ever happened, or depicting it simply as a threat.
Or he's agitating because it's happening.
Or maybe because it is happening, because it is something new that doesn't suit him. Now, could I ask you, to what degree do you think things might have been different if Paisley had not been agitating on the streets in the late 60s? To what degree did his street agitation feed into a certain kind of Irish nationalism or Irish republicanism? And if he had not been out on the streets, would it have been the case that unionism might have developed in a different kind of way?
It's a very, very difficult question. I mean, by talking about, say, Republicans organising in West Belfast, I find some people say to me, oh, so did they start the Troubles then in '66? And I say, no. Am I trying to say, well, Paisley's caused them? No, but I suppose what I am saying is that Paisley had been looking at ecumenism, all these new developments. He was very uneasy about them, and he'd been seeking a public platform. Now, if you go back and look at the Protestant Telegraph, I think that gets a purchase in late 65, and the articles in 66 are mostly about the threats from the upcoming commemoration. Now, there is actually some information that Stormont are receiving that, 66 could represent a real IRA threat. So I'm not suggesting it's all completely pie in the sky, but yeah, it definitely gives Paisley a platform he wouldn't otherwise have had. And if you look at the number of letters that O'Neill receives in the autumn of 1966, they're all saying you shouldn't have let these people go ahead with their commemoration. And, and then the fact, I suppose, that the fact that the UVF is refounded then at that crucial moment, April of 1966, and they kill Scullion and Ward. I mean, it's just a very complex conjunction of forces. It's almost like they're all in a way interdependent. It's an unfortunate coincidence that the 50th anniversary of the Rising happens to be the period at which O'Neill is trying to do something new, and at which Paisley has, horrors to summon through change that's beckoning, not really necessarily from within Northern Ireland at all, maybe just from ecumenism and broader international developments. But it's a really tricky period. I think, all of us historians really need to look more and more at those mid-60s years, because you could argue, I think, that unionism's very destabilised even before 68. Now, people might also say, well, Craig bans Republican clubs in 67. Maybe you could say that these commemorations in West Belfast do give a fillip to these Republican clubs.
Except that they were mainly a student body. Not Rory McShane, for example, joined, he said, because all the students were joining it. They were against the government,
Sure.
I can't read too much into
Sure.
that, I think. David, could things have worked out differently if Paisley had not been on the scene and perhaps speaking as he was?
Well, it's a very interesting question and difficult question. I think the one thing perhaps we should keep in mind in terms of whatever else you could say about Ian Paisley, he was a very astute politician, and so he was tapping into a sense within a constituency. And I think what you had was a process, as has been said, this process of modernisation was occurring, and change always threatens somebody. And I think that was the situation, that there was a large constituency who were fearful of the change. Ian Paisley was tapping into that sense, and he was representing their views. I think it's down to the old issue of does the leader represent the views of the people, or does he bring them forward with his views? And I think
it's an echo chamber.
Yeah, I think there was a situation that there was a lot of concerns, a lot of fears about what was happening, and that was the modernisation that was coming about, what that meant to people, and that's what was tapped into. So I don't think it was necessarily just about one individual. I also think it was about a time and a place, and I think there's a sense that we have moved a long way from that time and place now, hopefully.
I think he was very important, though.
Fergal, would you like to come in briefly on that?
No, I mean, I'd agree with what Margaret and David would have to say. I suppose the only thing I'd add to this is Margaret's given us a valuable warning, which is that the state and other bodies can't always control commemorations, but it's not a bad idea perhaps to try to put in an effort
to give them a steer
in a sensitive way. But the other maybe minor point I'd add is I think politicians can be incredibly sophisticated in the way that they use commemorations. It's not like the ghosts of history rise up and exert their look. Politicians are very careful and strategic. If they want to use a commemoration as a moment of reconciliation, maybe a good example is the Queen's visit to the Republic yesterday, that can happen. If politicians want to use commemoration for malign purposes, that will happen. I think the present day context is all important. And I think potentially we're in the most optimistic remembrance of any of the major ones.
And who would have envisioned even 2 or 3 years ago Peter Robinson giving the Edward Carson lecture in Ivey House with a photograph of Carson and Bonar Law, the Earl of Ivey, who met there in 1913 to oppose Home Rule in the background. It seemed incredible.